You read the title correctly. When was Yamcha in his prime? In today's video, we will directly be comparing him to Master Roshi, but there's a very simple answer that most would probably go for when it comes to Yamcha being at his best. And this directly is the Android arc of Dragon Ball for one very obvious reason. Yamcha had finished training with King Kai on King Kai's planet for quite some time, and then when he was brought back to life, he was immediately warned about the upcoming android threat by Trunks. So as a result of this, Yamcha had King Kai to bring out the best in himself, plus also training for the android threat to make him as strong as he could be, so we could probably take a major guess that Yamcha was probably at his best around the time that he was fighting against the Cell Juniors. Now, this is a bit strange, because in Dragon Ball Super, we see Yamcha return back to the battlefield where we see him taking on Moro's prison gang. Now, obviously, this was probably one of the most impressive things that Dragon Ball Super did, because Yamcha was out of the limelight for so long. I mean, he had some moments in the Dragon Ball Super anime where, like, you have the baseball episode, when they were, like, trolling the audience by basically saying that maybe the characters are going to ask Yamcha to join the Tournament of Power, but this was actually an arc where Yamcha actually got to fight, and considering the fact that he was flying around and doing Yamcha things, he clearly still had superhuman abilities relative to everybody else, so we could definitely say Yamcha was still a fighter, but he was probably weaker than what he originally was, considering the fact that there was no evidence that Yamcha was truly training over the course of all of these years. But this now creates another question about the future version of Yamcha, because though that version of Yamcha obviously would have probably been at his absolute peak from the moment that he came back to planet Earth. But now the comparison actually comes to Master Roshi. The question about Master Roshi is weird, because Master Roshi should theoretically be way, and by way, I mean way weaker than Yamcha. Like, to the point where this is something that Jax Blade and I have talked about for years, where it's kind of weird that Master Roshi is so strong, because even going back to Dragon Ball, Roshi was pretty much admitting that all of his quote-unquote students had surpassed him. And then when you factor in that in the anime adaptation, our characters were going through, like, the pendulum training on Kami's Lookout, but, the fact that they were training for the Saiyans, and then they went through so many different types of training, and the fact that Roshi could come back and fight against a character as powerful as Frost was one of the biggest shocks in Dragon Ball history. And that's not to say that I didn't appreciate it, because Master Roshi is one of my top 3 favorite characters in Dragon Ball history, and I definitely appreciated him getting more shine in Dragon Ball, but I have to be objective in saying, how does Roshi get this powerful? And one thing that Jax Blade pointed out in a recent suggestion for this video is we have to talk about the fact that if we were to equate real life to Master Roshi, the thing about him is that as he gets older, it's a lot harder for him to directly improve his abilities simply because of age and a whole bunch of, muscular effects on the actual body that you can go more in depth about. And as a result of that, it would be very hard for Roshi to physically improve himself, which is where you can bring up the argument of, well, he would improve himself energetically, and I could understand that, but the question is, what training did Roshi do to get this powerful? Because if Roshi's been doing the same type of training that he's been doing his whole life, it never got him anywhere near as strong as being capable of fighting on the level of our modern Dragon Ball characters. So obviously he must have found some brand new method that never was before seen in his life to even get him to even fight on par with somebody like Yamcha, especially after all the things that Yamcha had gone through. So ultimately, as much as I love Master Roshi, theoretically it would make more sense for Yamcha to have been in the Tournament of Power than Master Roshi if we were being completely logical. And you could say that Roshi is inherently a better fighter because he's more experienced, so theoretically if Master Roshi was as strong as Gotenks, for example, he would school Gotenks in a fight, because Master Roshi, if strength and speed was not a factor, he's a significantly more experienced and wiser fighter. But obviously due to the enormous power gap, Gotenks would obviously have an advantage. And that's kind of the case that I look at with Yamcha. Roshi's more skilled, but Yamcha should be more powerful by such a massive margin that he should have been chosen over him. And ultimately, that brings the question of, how powerful was Yamcha at his best, and does it make any sense for him to be more powerful than Master Roshi?